As I sit down to record this video, Humankind has been out for 1 month. And it would be fair to say you guys seem to be just as interested in the franchise as you were 1 month ago. And indeed, general reviews have been mostly positive on Steam and across a variety of media platforms. In this video, I'm going to reflect in detail on Humankind. This is my 1 month in review. I like to do this for a lot of strategy games. The one I did before this was Old World, and I figure Humankind, being probably the most significant release of 2021 as far as strategy games are concerned, is probably worth revisiting. I'm around 3 figures into my hours played, so I have a fair amount of experience with this game. If you're new here, I make a lot of content on Humankind, including live streams right here on YouTube. Do consider sticking around and subscribing, but first, hear me out. Let's jump in, and I'm gonna start with the big one. Cultures. So as we know, in Humankind, we don't choose a civilization from the very beginning of the game, but rather we change civilizations, or cultures, within each era. We have 6 opportunities to do so throughout most Humankind games, and each culture has its own unique flair and flavor, right? They specialize with affinities. Some are scientific in nature, with special abilities around their science production. Others are agrarian, focusing on food, so on and so forth, through 7 of the key metrics in Humankind, just as they are in any other strategy game. But how do the cultures work? And are they working well in practice? This video is a reflective piece on the last month worth of intense Humankind coverage, after all. I think overall, the historical flavor that the cultures give us is actually very unique, and to be honest, and this will be a very raw and honest video, I'm really pleased with just how the developers have managed to capture the uniqueness and the nuance of real-world cultures in Humankind. Let me give you an example. When you move through into the game's second era, one of the cultures you can choose are Huns, right? The Huns. Their unique unit, as you would expect, is the Hunnic Horde. And for those unfamiliar, historically, the Huns ran rampant across, really, the entire Asian continent, right the way across to Moscow and even further still, and absolutely took it by storm. Humankind captures this very, very well indeed. When you play as the Huns, you can't build new cities. Indeed, the Huns aren't known for their massive urbanization. In fact, the opposite is true, right? They were a largely nomadic people. Again, Humankind captures that very well with the unique unit, the Hunnic Horde, which can scavenge just like the very early game units in Humankind that we have in the Neolithic era, right? When you win fights or find food, in those units' cases, they multiply. The Hunnic Hordes can multiply. And that is so true to life, right? They ran across this open terrain. They scavenged and ransacked everything they could and multiplied and took land. And I think that Humankind does a great job at capturing that historical essence. It's a flavor. It's a sound and it's a feeling, and I think that the game does a very good job at that. Moving along from that sort of feeling, that objective balance, how does Humankind handle cultures in terms of real game balance? And this one is still a little bit more up in the air, to be honest. I tend to be of the belief, and to quote one of my favorite movies of all time, The Incredibles, if everyone is super, no one is. What that means in practice is, if all of these cultures seem overpowered, if they all have a strategy or multiple strategies that leads them to be broken or what have you, then maybe none of them are. And that tends to be the mantra that I follow when I'm thinking about Humankind. Now, do the cultures need some rebalancing? Yes, right? In the first era, we know, for example, that the Egyptians and the Harappans tend to be better than basically any other culture. The insane industrial production of the Egyptians and the food powerhouse, the population gain of the Harappans does tend to lead these cultures to be stronger than others. However, this can be relatively easily fixed by either dropping them down or, what I would like to see, lifting the others up. Once the developers have a lot of data behind them, right? They can see all of our player data, they can see the cultures we're playing as, how often we're winning, so on and so forth. I think they'll be able to make some really informed decisions. And I'll touch a little bit more about this in 2 other parts in this video when I talk about faith. I'm going to talk particularly with one key example around how I believe cultures in Humankind are actually a bit stronger than what we might think, even some of the weak ones, and a little bit further on in this video as well. I should say, now, as we're 5 minutes in, I'll be talking about cities and territories, pollution, speeds, glitches, patches, and some forward focus. Anyway, let's move into my second point in this review, and that is cities and territories. In Humankind, we have a very different system to, say, Civilization, which is what a lot of historical strategy gamers will be playing as well. Indeed, I am included in that group. I do love Civ, and I also love Humankind, full disclosure. Right, so we have that sort of historical balance there, but it's very different from the structure of Civilization and how Civilization has us settle. Players who have played Amplitude Studios' other games, like Endless Legend for example, will feel a bit more at home with the system though. Basically, in a world we have pre-defined territories with relatively natural feeling boundaries. They tend to be along rivers or lakes or ridges, so on and so forth. Inside of these territories, we can choose where we want to place an outpost, which can then be turned into a city, and these can be connected to each other as well. You can merge outposts and cities together, for example, to create megacities. What players didn't really like as much about this, at least was the feeling I got from sort of combing the forums and reading all of your many comments on my videos. Thank you so much for those, by the way. The feeling that I got was that players were a little bit disappointed with having predefined territories because we liked, say, the flexibility in Civ of being able to settle anywhere. But we like the extra flexibility that comes with having outposts that can turn into cities, being able to connect them and place them where you like. And overall, I don't think there's necessarily an objective answer as to which is better or worse. But what I can do with well over 100 hours into this game now is reflect on, does it work or not? How well does it work? And to be honest, and again, these are my raw, unfiltered, not at all sponsored or affiliated opinions, I think that the system works very well. It works well because of the way it interacts with Humankind's influence. Influence kind of like culture in Civ, kind of, but different. And the way that influence works basically is it sort of scales your settlements. It allows you to spread naturally and sort of have governance over your people. It's sort of designed to mimic political control in a way, and it interrelates within Humankind's societal system and how your influence can spread over other societies and influence, say, their social policies and their laws. It's a detailed and complex system, and it's not just about territories and where you place a city and whether your borders expand naturally around those territories or not. It's about influence. It's about trade posts. It's entirely connected in with the fabric of the game, and to change that would be a mistake. And that is my full opinion on cities and settlements in Humankind. One thing to note here, and I'm not sure whether this should even be fixed or not, but it does tend to lead us to play wide. Not only that, but also the way that the era stars work in Humankind, and from rewarding players from expanding to more territories and placing more districts, and these districts have insane yields. You do tend to be rewarded for playing wide, and the reason why I say maybe this doesn't need to be fixed, as a player who traditionally played tall in Civ, that is, to have a few Civs with large populations in a small area, rather than where I say wide, I mean that should be fairly self-explanatory, you comb out far and wide and claim as much as you can, right? I wonder whether this actually really needs to be fixed, though, because if this is the story of Humankind, if this is a historical strategy game based off the development of cultures and indeed our whole society, right? Humankind. You can't get any more broad than that to describe us, where we have been and where we are now. Maybe playing wide is actually just appropriate in that case. Name me a successful civilization, unless, indeed in recent history, that hasn't, dare I say, played wide. Colonial powers were successful for a reason, and one of those reasons was because they played wide. I'll leave you with that to ponder. Do let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm very keen to hear it. And actually that brings me through into my next point, and shout out to you, Pete, if you're watching this. I really appreciated the detailed messages you sent me after my recent live streams, and I want to talk now about a few specific in-game features before I move on to some of the broader things around developers support, patches, DLC, so on and so forth. First and foremost, I think that faith and pollution are actually the two big ones that I'm going to cover here as case studies, okay? There are many more things to talk about, but I'm going to focus on those two because I don't want to keep you here for hours and hours and hours, and chances are many of you have already clicked away, so I appreciate you for still sticking around. Now, faith is an interesting one. I don't think that faith in Humankind is a bad system. I believe it's a basic system, though. Definitely. Players do think that there should be more ways to interact with it, perhaps more trade-offs. Here it is now, actually, in the latest version of the patch, where they've changed how you get faith from this first tenet, polytheism and shamanism. It's now earned from main plazas versus administrative centers. That's your cities versus outposts, rather than territories versus population. Nice change. We'll talk more on that later. But I think that the overall faith system is quite basic, but it ain't bad. And actually, there are some ways to use it that are very, very powerful. It's just not immediately obvious because the tenets that it has, firstly, their yields aren't displayed very transparently or openly, so it can be hard to track down exactly what your faith is doing. That should be an easy fix. Secondly, the faith system as a whole is relatively basic. We only have 4 tenets, and those tenets don't have big trade-offs. They're not very specialized, they're quite broad, and there's lots to choose from, and they're fairly wide-reaching. Not a lot of trade-off. Basically, you just earn faith, earn as much faith as you can, get to the tenets first, and win the religious game. Thankfully, it's not a win condition, otherwise that would be a bit broken. But as I say, I actually don't think it's a bad system, and here I want to talk on one specific example. I played a live stream the other day, a few days ago now, and it was basically me playing bad cultures. Chat chose my cultures, we chose them together, we chose off-meta cultures that no one is playing. What that tended to mean was we played a lot of cultures that rewarded faith. Because, in general, these cultures aren't played as much, they tend to be worse as well. What we ended up finding, and what Pete, shout out again to you Pete, pointed out to me, was that actually, it ended up being one of the best playthroughs I've ever done. On accident, because I played the hard faith game. I got some key things that intersect with faith, and these are some of the other complexities that I think we're not quite acknowledging when we think about the broader faith system. For example, wonders. Cultural wonders are a big part of faith in Humankind. Yes, you earn them with influence, but a lot of them either reward faith or interact with faith. For example, Angkor Wat, say what? Rewards food for faith. I accidentally built a strong faith run and romped home. Bet my nearest opponent not on easy difficulty either, we were playing hard, and bet them twice over, right? Now granted, this is just one example of one very specific game, and there are definitely many branching outcomes in Humankind, right? There are over 1 million, I believe 1.6 million different combinations of cultures to begin with. So I acknowledge this is one small example, but it's an example of how maybe some of these systems actually have more depth and detail than we think. However, do I think faith needs to be improved? Absolutely I do. I've talked about it in this video and in previous videos. It's not perfect, but I do think it has a little more nuance than we think. You can also, for example, change your holy sites and so on and so forth. There are little details, and the developers are adding more and more to it every time. More on that a bit later in the video. But second up, the other big case study that I want to draw on here is pollution. Now, pollution is something that really annoys a lot of players. Either we think it happens far too quickly, or we don't think it happens soon enough. Most players, from what I've heard now, tend to think it happens too quickly rather than not soon enough. The developers are constantly tweaking it, and I think we'll see a large overhaul of it in the future as well. By and large, it's a system that was added, we think, toward the end of the game's life cycle because it wasn't in the closed beta, but it did make it into the full version. Pollution is one of the mechanics, and here I'll touch a little bit on victories and fame and so on. It's one of the mechanics that can end the game, or at least cause a game-ending moment. With pollution, it can end the game where the world becomes uninhabitable, right? This, unfortunately, could very much happen to real-world humankind one day as well. It's not that unrealistic, but it's one of the game-ending conditions. Another one is, for example, if you make it to Mars, right? You finish the space race. Nuking the world into oblivion, or indeed launching a nuke will do it too. If you romp on one of their capitals like I did in one of my last games. Very fun, by the way. Nukes in this game are fantastic as a tangential point. However, back to the main point. There are all of these game-ending features, these game-ending moments, right, that are very, very end game, obviously. The other one being the turn timer. That also disappoints some players, and it's worth noting that right here, right now. But back to pollution. Yes, it can end the game, and it doesn't sort of scale quite as well and quite as transparently as players would like. However, again, I would stress that the pollution system is something that they're working on. Does it work right now? My honest answer, no. It doesn't, and it should be better. Are they making it better? It seems like it. I'll touch a little bit more on that later, but it's one example of a mechanic that was added late and we're still seeing some adjustments and tweaks, and I expect we'll see more moving forward. The developers seem very supportive of that at the very, very least. Next up here, I want to talk about game speeds and overall pacing in Humankind. Not just the game speeds that we choose at the start, i.e. Blitz mode, which is 75 turns, normal speed, which is 300 turns, or the slowest game speed, Endless, which is 600 turns. But also, the broader pacing of the eras as well is something I want to touch on here. So first and foremost, game speeds. By and large, blitz speed is very difficult. The AI scales so quickly in it, it's hard to keep up, and other things don't scale. For example, unit movement doesn't scale. So in a larger game where you can move 4 tiles and it takes a turn, and 1 turn is 1/300th of the game, in Blitz mode you can move 4 tiles, it takes a turn, but that turn is 1/75th of the game. Indeed, 4 times as much of your game. You only move 4 tiles. Now, I don't know if that needs to be tweaked specifically because that could lead to other chain reactions down the line, but it's important to note that the Blitz mode doesn't scale really a whole lot beyond what you need to actually get through the eras, and I think that that could use a little bit more tweaking as well. One thing that I would actually really like to see with Blitz mode is, let me play Blitz, let me play 75 turns and relatively quickly, but let me choose my eras. Maybe I just want to play the first 3, and that's it. Or maybe I just want to play the last 2, and that's it. I think that would be a great way to change the Blitz mode. At least for me, I would really, really enjoy that. Moving forward, though, I think more broadly, Humankind needs some longer modes. Even on the 600 turn mode, you can finish up a game in, let's say, around 10 hours. And really, for a really complex, deep strategy game like this, particularly one that's historically inspired, I would expect it to be more like 15 to 20. So I think probably we, at the very least, need a true endless mode that has, I don't know, 900 turns, 1,000, maybe even 1,200, right? I think that would change that a lot, and that would be overall a really great improvement. Secondly, here on game speeds, I want to talk more specifically around pacing. So in Humankind, in general here again, the game pacing, the general feel of the community at least, has been that the game pacing is slightly off in that the later eras are difficult to reach on those lower speeds in particular. Personally, I haven't struggled to reach the contemporary era, the last era in the game, and have a reasonable feel and opportunity to play it on those slower speeds. Sometimes on normal, but definitely comfortably on slow and endless. That's 450 turns and 600. I don't struggle at all. In fact, I can be there much earlier than 300 turns on normal. I can be there around 200 if I really try, which I don't often. But if I really try, I can get there. But on the earlier speeds, it's very difficult. And so again, I think there's potentially a pacing thing at play here. However, to play devil's advocate, which I love to do, often in these kind of games, the modern eras, even though they have arguably the most exciting toys, right, helicopters and nukes and so on, tend to be the most boring because there's less to progress forward into. You're sort of wrapping up, almost, right? And so in many ways, not making it to the last era or spending less time in the last era doesn't actually put me off all that much. Keen to know your thoughts on that one as well. My goodness, I'm asking you for a lot of thoughts. Let's now move on to glitches, patches, and the state of humankind 1 month on. So, I think that the game definitely launched with quite a few glitches, right? That's no secret. And many players have found, for example, the pending turn glitch, where a game essentially freezes on the turn timer trying to tick over into the next turn. It just gets stuck there. That was a really noticeable one. There were other ones as well. For example, if you were the third empire to meet an independent people, Humankind's city-states, then you would just naturally influence them even if you hadn't met them, actually, I believe. You just naturally, if you were the third player, you just built up influence with them regardless of what you did. That was a bit game-breaking. There were others as well to do with civics and so on. I'm quite pleased to say, and this relates into my next point around patches and dev support, that the team at Amplitude Studios have, it seems like, and again, this is not sponsored or affiliated at all, but it seems to me like they've worked really hard to address these. We've had 2 significant patches and 1 or 2 smaller ones. The second significant patch is in beta at the moment, but I'm sure it will be releasing soon if history's anything to go by. And man, then they've addressed a lot of bugs and a lot of fixes in those patches. I have, in my personal experience, again with over 100 hours, right, 3 figures played in the game, haven't actually come across too many of them. I've had my battles be a little bit slow and glitch out. I've had the end turn glitch ruin 1 game for me, which was devastating, but only 1 out of, I don't even know how many I've played at this point. So overall, I don't actually think they were that widely impactful, but when they hit you, it hurt. It really hurt. And it's good to see that they're making changes and improving those, and overall, I can recommend Humankind to anybody who wants to buy it. Again, this isn't an affiliated video, but I do have links in the description on all of my videos if you're interested in checking something out and giving me a little bit of a kickback support in the process. I appreciate that as much as I appreciate you wicked super chat donors and channel members as well. Thank you for helping me do what I do. But anyway, that's a tangent. Let's move back into my next point on the sort of state of humankind, and that's patches and dev support. As I've said, the support levels have been pretty good across the board, and it makes me hopeful for the future of Humankind. Now, we're yet to see any significant balances to, say, overall balancing on cultures, right? We've seen a couple of tweaks to the Hunnic Hordes, for example, and little things like Merchant and Ace Knight stars being slightly easier to earn. You can earn them earlier. But we haven't seen wide-reaching change to cultures and wide-reaching development changes yet. And I think, to be fair, it's probably too soon to see those, right? It's only been out for a month. As I said earlier in the video, they need data, they need analysis to make these changes that really impact the overall gameplay. And I expect we'll see more of those in future. But in the last 2 significant patches, we did see changes to, for example, faith. We've talked about pollution changes. Diplomacy as well. So they're making these changes, and it's really good to see them progressing those. I hope, sincerely, that we see the same level of dedication and support for years to come. I really hope that we see a model similar to how Civilization has been supported, but maybe some tweaks and changes around how the DLC models are actually pushed out in practice. That's probably a conversation for another video, but it's important to note nonetheless that I think overall the dev team have done a really stellar job at supporting Humankind so far, and it makes me really optimistic at what the future of this game holds, but also makes me really happy to have it as something here on the channel that is a big part of me and a big part of sort of JumboPixel as a whole, right? I wouldn't be playing this game so much if A, I didn't like it a lot, and B, I didn't think it had a future. Just want to make that really clear. Absolutely my totally honest opinion on Humankind. There it is. Lastly, and speaking of the future, let's talk about what do we think the future holds for Humankind. And again, this is sort of crystal ball gazing here on my part. I expect we'll continue to see roughly monthly to bi-monthly patches as we've seen and are currently seeing. There was one in August. We're having a big one in September. I expect the same to continue. Obviously slower a bit around potentially the end of year holiday period, but by and large I expect us to see that full support, and of course Like any other strategy game on the market, we'd be a fool to not consider that there would be some sort of expansion DLC packs added to Humankind. Could it be cultures? Maybe. Difficult to add too many more cultures into each era, though, don't you think? Although imagine that, a roster of 20 or 30. Never again would you have to choose, for example, a militarist culture because all the expansionists are gone. Or never again would you have to not choose a merchant culture in the medieval era because there ain't one, right? So maybe, actually, that could be a totally valid system. I think also we'll probably see some additional gameplay systems added in, like, maybe, a revamp of the entire faith system, or new mechanics. Natural disasters is one that I would love to see us be able to at least turn on and off, but I'm a big fan of them across the board. So I would love to see those brought into a more developed environmental system, a more developed climate change, pollution, all of those mechanics that we know exist in real life, that we know are shaping our lives right now and will continue to do so even more so in the future. And I think Humankind can build on that experience too. Thank you very much for watching my detailed, in-depth reflections on Humankind. I do believe this game is worth a buy, and I'm very much looking forward to covering more of it here on the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.